Hi, this video is going to serve as the lecture for Friday, December 5th, 2014 for Ms. Moser's biology class. You will need to have your notes out. You will need to write down the PowerPoint slides as they appear, as well as extra information that's contained in the video. Okay, are we ready? Good. Don't forget, you can make lots of use of the pause button if you need something to be repeated or if you need to hold the slide still. We had talked a little bit about in class the fact that animals aren't the only prey species. Animals that eat plants are also considered predators, and the plants that they eat are their prey. This is not the way we usually think of predator-prey relationships. But believe me, that clover quakes in fear when it sees the rabbit approach. Just as we talked about some of the defense mechanisms that animals have to evade their predators, plants have defense mechanisms too, but plants can't run. Plants can't run, and also a lot of plants depend on their fruit being eaten in order to spread their offspring, such as these raspberries. Now, the thorns on that make it unlikely that any animal will want to come along and take a big mouthful of the plant, but when these berries are ripe, they'll actually drop off the plant or be so easy to pull off the plant that they'll almost drop off. Then the fruit's ready to spread seeds, and the thorns aren't an issue for animals that would eat it. Things like this hawthorn tree also have thorns, and though they're a little bit less dependent on animals to spread their seeds, they still have thorns to protect themselves against getting too much of their vegetation eaten. Cactus are another example of plants that have evolved an adaptation that makes it difficult for plant predators, or herbivores, to eat too much of their flesh. Not all plants have thorns or spikes or tough leathery skin. Some plants have chemical defenses. One common strategy for plants is to produce chemicals in their own tissues that are not used for photosynthesis. These are called secondary compounds because, of course, the primary compounds that a plant produces are those chemicals it needs to carry on its own life function. Secondary compounds are extra chemicals that the plants make, and these chemicals very often are poisonous or harmful in some other way. Three examples pictured here are tobacco. That's these guys out in the field. Now, tobacco contains nicotine in its leaves, in its stems, in its flowers, because it doesn't want its leaves to be eaten or consumed. It wants the flowers to go to fruit, and then that fruit to fall off and spread. Poison ivy is another example of a plant that produces secondary compounds, and many of us know these all too well. The compound is called urushiol, and that's the chemical in poison ivy that makes you miserable. Every part of the plant contains urushiol, but in the winter, when the tiny little white berries are hanging on the plant, the level of urushiol in most of the plant is pretty low. That's the point in the year when poison ivy, in essence, wants its seeds to be distributed by birds. The last example we've got here is wild cherry. Now, this is not the kind of cherry you buy at the grocery store. Wild cherries have beautiful sprays of little white flowers, but there's a problem with wild cherries. Every part of the plant contains cyanic acid. Well, that's a poison. Anybody who's got horses or cows will know that you don't want to pasture in an area where there are too many cherry trees, because the wilted leaves, if livestock chews on them, can contain enough cyanic acid to make livestock really sick and in some cases actually kill them. So again, the chemicals that plants produce that are not used for photosynthesis but are just to discourage herbivores from eating the plants are called secondary compounds. Okay, so we've covered our first symbiotic relationship. Remember, sym, together, biotic, bio, living things. So symbiotic relationships are relationships between two species that are multi-generational and long-term. So we've talked about predation. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite, parasitism. In a parasitic relationship, one species is harmed and another species benefits. And the species that is benefiting is the parasite. The parasite feeds on some other species. That's the one that's harmed. That's the host. So we learned that predators typically chase down, kill, and consume their prey. But parasites usually don't kill their host. Why not? Feel free to use your pause button here while you think about it. So these are pinworms living in a human gut. This is a botfly. It's a species of insect who lays eggs into the flesh of an unsuspecting mammal. These little flies are down in that pimply-looking thing. Ew! These are intestinal roundworms found in the stomach of an animal that somebody was dissecting. Again, the parasites typically don't kill their host. Why not? Ding, 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 ding. It's because they know where their next meal is coming from. As long as the host is alive and well, these pinworms have good meals and a safe place to live in the gut of the host. As long as this warm-blooded animal is still walking around, these botfly babies have a safe, warm place to grow up. Ooh! So it's to the advantage of parasites not to kill their host. Now, sometimes parasites do weaken their host significantly. These pinworms are taking nutrition away from their host. This botfly is using up some of its host's energy, some of its host's blood and lymph. Any of these, the botfly could cause an infection, which could kill the host. These little intestinal roundworms are taking nutrition away from the host. It's possible for parasites to kill their host just by weakening it and making it more susceptible to other things. There are two major classes of parasites. Ectoparasites, which are those that live on the outside of a host. These would include things like fleas, there's a common cat flea, leeches, and ticks. Mosquitoes, lice, mites of all sorts. These are also all ectoparasites. That's not so bad. Well, let's look at the other major classification of parasites. Oh yes, the endoparasites. Tapeworms, such as this lovely big fat tapeworm that's living in a human gut, those are an endoparasite. These are things that live inside the body of the host. Pinworms. These are pinworms living in a human gut. Ooh! And this is a fish tapeworm. Believe me, if you're ever cutting a fish that you have caught and you see a bunch of tapeworms, you probably just need to get rid of the fish. Those are endoparasites. Now, we said that parasites don't typically kill their host, not if they can help it, but they sometimes weaken their host. So the host doesn't really want to play host. This has led to an interesting little arms race. Parasitic relationships drive the evolution of host and parasite species. So, many of the parts of your immune system that you take quite for granted are actually things that at one time in human history defended you against parasites. Tears, saliva, mucus, really your whole immune system. But of course, every time a host organism develops a defense against some kind of parasite, you can bet that the parasite will develop some way to get around that defense. We're going to stop here for now. You will have a recall quiz on Monday, the 8th. You'll be able to use any notes that you made from this video during the quiz, so hopefully you were taking notes. All right, I'll see you on Monday.